Hi, welcome back. So, okay, so this is the assignment the video where we're going to kind of talk about week five readings. I normally do these ahead of time, and I'm sorry, it's just things have been kind of crazy at work, so I just need to, I'm just trying to get caught up to be able to do that. So, week five, there's really four major topics. There's possible pitfalls of implementing, communicating, and measuring total rewards. Topic two, cultural, legal, and country specific practices, and then metric and evaluation, then, of course, conclusion. So we'll jump right into topic one, which is talking about pitfalls of implementing, communicating, and measuring total rewards. Look, 30,000 foot level, these are the same problems we see with implementing darn near anything. All right. Number one, jumping around without the required research. How many times have we worked for an organization where it seems like management doesn't even really talk to anybody before they implement something, which is ridiculous. But sometimes the speed of life prevents us from doing it. Not having the support of the organization. One of the things that I'm very fascinated with is organizational power and how it influences things, and then especially when you take that and combine it with, when we talk about an organizational culture, which is, there's a person by the name of Martin. Martin's the last name. I'm blanking on the first name. Fantastic book about three types of culture, where it's you have the integrated, the differentiated, and then the fractional or fragmentation. And one of the things that I always talk about is that if you understand how your organization is built, if you have an integrated culture, getting the support is usually pretty simple. Normally, I don't know, in my personal opinion, integrated cultures, usually you see them in smaller organizations, small mom and pop shop type things, where the founder is still kind of running things. Differentiated cultures usually tend to happen where you have multiple subcultures within the organization, and then you have fragmentation, which is some people, it's either culture is not really solidifying, it's constantly morphing, it's not really calmed down, or as some people interpret it, culture doesn't really exist. I tend not to feel that way. I tend to be more of a differentiated person. That tends to be my experience. And one of the things that I begin to realize is that if you understand that you have a differentiated organization, using the centers of power from those differentiated groups can usually help you achieve success within organizational change. And so, if you don't have the support of the organization by understanding how the power structures are, in my opinion, it's going to fail. And so that's usually where you start running into some other things. Not analyzing costs, being an accountant. This I've seen where people get busted by this day in and day out. They think that they got everything taken care of, they really don't, and it doesn't go well for them. Attempting to do too much too quickly, I think that there's definitely a lot of that, especially, everyone's in a hurry to get caught up, and but that kind of bleeds into the not doing the analysis, not doing the right research, and not having the support of the organization. So, the other thing is not establishing objectives and metrics that are linked to the business objectives. Remember, go back to your 300. What's the total? First, we start with the strategic plan, and then on top of that, we have diversity, and everything above that is all pillars, where we have your recruiting strategy, your compensation strategy, your benefit strategy, and some of the other different types of strategy that we have. Um, then it says not as okay, having to take rewards away. If you have them, introduced and then taken away, I agree. It's worse than not having them at all. Nobody likes. I'm trying to think of the politically correct term. I know there's a lot of really bad ones out there, but you give something, you take it away. It's the most painful thing to do to a person. So let's not do that. Let's plan this out properly and get this stuff done. Unexpected change in requisite KSAs or business plan. This is something that we really have to understand is that organizations are constantly changing, and so as a result of which, it's very important that we keep up with the idea that it might change, and as a result of which, hey, maybe a very good example. What it was like when the internet first came out. All of a sudden, it was pretty sudden change in how things had happened. Email. I remember when I still remember when I was working at the Olive Garden as a restaurant, and somebody said, "Oh, I sent you an email." He says, "Okay, well, I'll check it when I get home." Nowadays people be like, "Okay, well, I'll grab my smartphone and figure it out," and all that. It's definitely changed significantly since those days. So um, it's a good deal. So communication issues such as errors in the message or not understanding the audience. I think that again gets back to not doing proper research, or not having support of the organization. Measuring the wrong things. Yeah, we've all had that one manager who just their favorite metric. Yeah, I used to have one talked about everything in ROI. It's kind of like the old, the Princess Bride, where the guy says, you keep saying that word, but I don't think it means what you think it means. And there's a lot of times where the person's using because I can't remember the name of the character, but this guy, inconceivable, and he says, you keep using that word, but I don't think it means what you think it means, and so it's definitely a very interesting dynamic from that. So make sure you're measuring the right thing, and make sure you understand the measurements that you're using. Not measuring. Nothing is more dangerous than going into territory having no clue as to what's happening. Using available data that's not relevant. We all, this is a data-centric world that we're living in, and data crunching is probably a very, data analytics. Actually, they're creating master's degrees in data analytics because there's just such high demand for it, and the amount of crunching that has to happen. It's a phenomenal new area. Not that I would suggest getting out of HR to get into it, but I would not be surprised if, in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to be seeing more and more people with master's degrees in data analytics being hired to do things because of how it happens. And then the final thing they talk about is measuring everything, where people just say, we're going to measure everything. And what they don't realize is that there's certain nuggets that they can pull out of that that's more efficient and more effective. So next topic where they talk about, further in this one topic, they're talking about pitfalls to specific websites. They're talking about how a lot of these organizations like to use websites to communicate a lot of the data that they have. I think it's a good idea to do that, but I don't know. My personal opinion is putting your entire total rewards online, probably not the wisest move. You want people to come to you to have it. Now, there may be like internal messaging that you could do, or meetings that talk about total rewards, or some other things that are kind of going on. I mean, there's different ways to be able to do the connections. It's not that difficult. So, okay, topic 2 that we have that's going on is talking about cultural, legal, and country-specific practices. One of the things that we have that obviously internationalization, and my personal experience, I used to work at KPMG where I did international returns for impats and expats. So people who are going outside the United States, people coming to the United States to work. That's an actual area that I specialize in. And so it requires a little bit of finesse, because there's times where I'm dealing with somebody from France, and they have certain needs and wants and desires that somebody from Germany may not have. We have to be very careful about a lot of the things. Now, we used to help people who were going to send people overseas too, and we ended up running into a lot of these issues. Be sensitive to cultural issues. One of the biggest mistakes I think that they have is when a company decides that they're going to go into a new market line, and they don't fully appreciate things that are kind of going on. I think one of my favorite ones, and forgive me, I don't speak Spanish at all, but someone was telling me that the word for nova in either Spanish or Portuguese or something like that meant no go. And so when when Ford brought their car down to introduce it, they had to change the name from Nova to something else, because they didn't want to, have the people. I mean, who's going to buy a car that means no go, right? I think another one that's very common, if you've ever spent any time in Japan, There's the drink called Kaupisu, which, if you don't pronounce it correctly, it sounds like cow. Well, you know. So, obviously, when they bring that to, to the United States, they market it a little different. Calpisi, I think, is how they do it, and so it doesn't sound as bad as Calpisu. The other one is Pocari Sueto. Okay, Pocari Sweat, which is it's a drink that, if you think about it, it's a drink that you drink when you're sweaty because you've just worked out, and so it's kind of like Gatorade, but it's a Japanese version of Gatorade. Who's going to buy a drink, that says, that says sweat in it? It seems like you're drinking sweat, which of course is nasty, So we can see that as it comes over here, and we can see how that it affects us here in the United States when people bring over products and they have to change the names in order to make it better for us or more palatable for us to buy it. It's the opposite when you're going overseas. You have to know the laws. There are certain customs and practices overseas that here in the United States. I think a very good example is bribery. There are some countries that's just the way you get things done, and if you're not willing to grease a palm, you're not going to do it. Now, you have to understand that that's illegal to do that. And if you go over to another country and you conduct bribery, you can also be held responsible in this country for that bribery. So you have to understand the laws, not only the laws that apply over there, but also the laws that apply over here that while you're over there. Because most laws stop at the border, but there's some laws that will continue going on with you. Another good example is the United States is one of the few countries that is on worldwide taxation. So if you go over to another country, you have to pay taxes on your income, whether you're in the United States or not. So that's important. Balance external competitiveness with internal equality, such as equal rewards for equal, workers, regardless. This is sort of a this is sort of a sensitive topic. Okay, look. Companies are going to go overseas for one specific reason. I mean, to be honest, labor's cheaper. I think you have to be careful when you're designing total rewards packages when you go overseas. You can't walk into an area, I mean, it's the same thing here in the United States. Let me give you an example in the United States. If you were to go if you're going to go set up a company in Abilene, Texas. I don't know if any of you have ever been stationed in Abilene, Texas. If you're Air Force, you might have had a chance to go to Dias. Abilene, Texas is not an extremely wealthy part of the world. Okay, everything's super cheap there. Okay, you could make $50,000 to $60,000 a year in Abilene, Texas, and you're doing okay. You're doing pretty good. That's middle class. Okay, if you hire somebody in the Washington D.C. metro area for $50,000 to $60,000, that's a beginning salary. Okay, you're not going to hire somebody for that low amount of salary and expect them to stick around if they're going to continue doing that. So if you're going to pay somebody in Abilene, Texas, exactly what you're going to pay them here in the Washington D.C. metro area, it's not going to be a very realistic situation. Again, there is sort of an ethics thing that simply moving to your company to Abilene, Texas because it's cheaper, there's some people who have some issues with that. I tend to be a stockholder theory kind of person. I'm like, let the stockholders vote. It's their company anyways, but that's just, my personal opinion, not the university's opinion or anybody else's opinion. People tend to, have some very sensitive things about that. It's exacerbated when you go overseas and you have a lot of these people who really focus on, they're like, we're going to pick up, and we saw this a lot in the 90s and 2000s where they were willing to move over to places like China, India, and Bangladesh and all that stuff because they could get dirt cheap wages. And of course, now we're starting to find out where some of the dirt cheap wages were. Where they got the sweatshops and they got a lot of people who were practically working in near slave conditions. Obviously, we want to do things that are not hurting others. I tend to be very utilitarian, but at the same time also a little bit of deontology to say, hey, look, everybody's got rights. We don't want to mistreat people or anything of that nature, but I think it's very difficult to make that decision. So really need to hire a country expert before you go in. You want to make good ethical choices because your company's reputation's on the line. And as we've seen, where some of these famous people were sending, having workers overseas make their clothing line, and it turns out that they were not using ethical labor practices. Guess what? All of a sudden, their clothing line no longer valuable. Okay, so we need to make sure that that gets taken care of in a clean and ethical way. I like how it says here, don't be too different. Total rewards should have broad commonality on the company's goal strategy. Okay, this gets back to what is the strategy of the organization? How does that fit into, and then how does your compensation strategy fit into the global strategy of the organization? Obviously, if you are a healthcare organization, you're going to want to do healthy things for your employees. Now, does that mean that you're going to do the same healthy stuff for Americans that you're going to do for people in China? No. Chinese people have a very different view of health than the United States does. Probably why most of us have this glorified double chin that I'm earning as I get older, and a lot of them over there don't because they eat tons of vegetables. They also do a lot of Chinese medicine, a lot of Tai Chi and things of that nature. Stuff that we here in the United States oftentimes don't do. So there's certain practices that you're going to want to do that are still going to fit within your strategy, but maybe you're going to have to do things. You're going to have to do things a little different. But it's I think a very good example someone once told me is be different, but stay true to yourself. And I think that's really where the company needs to go in order to be successful. So I'm not going to get into this on the video, but they talk about different country differences. Canada, France, United States, China, Japan, India, and all that. I was reading over some of them. I think they're very general. The most important thing you have to understand, folks, when you go overseas, people are people. I understand that there's generalizations that take place. For example, to a Japanese culture tends to be very low context culture. High context culture. High context culture meaning they speak little, mean a lot. By some other countries in the world where they speak a lot and don't mean a whole lot. I think it's a very good example. We have that here in the United States too. For example, I noticed that, my wife, who's not from the United States originally, she finds it interesting as we move around to different portions of the country how people are. And, she says, wow, Southerners tend to run their mouths, and all that stuff, which is true. When I was living in Texas, we tend to talk a lot. And I think that, a very good example of that, there was a Budweiser commercial where the guy comes in off the airport, and, of course, the New Yorker way of greeting each other. How you doing? How you doing? How you doing? How you doing? And then all of a sudden this cowboy-looking guy walks in and says, "Oh, I'm doing mighty fine, thank you very much. Well, I just arrived at your airport, my nice airport y'all have here." And of course, everybody from New York is looking at this guy going, "What have we just started?" By talking to this person. He's not just, it's in, whereas, so there's that difference. And then of course, people in the Midwest, I think tend to be overly friendly. Whereas I tend to notice that a lot of people in the Northeast tend to keep themselves a little bit more. But that's more of the Midwest sort of culture that we have, where, the good old days when you got out there, if you weren't nice to people, you could end up dead. Whereas, if you get into New York and you get into other parts of the country, if you talk to people too much about your stuff, you could end up dead. Not necessarily dead, but it would be dangerous because you don't want everyone butting into your business. It's just differences, and the world does the same thing. Japanese people tend to be very, very reserved compared to Americans. whereas I've done business with you know, some organization, you know, some people down in Latin America, and you know, sometimes you can get into a shouting match, which is done oftentimes as a negotiation tactic. You know, and then right afterwards, you're best friends again. So you know, it's not a big deal. Yeah. So read the various things, and you know, and you know, if you have any questions, reach out to me. Topic 3, and this will be the last topic that we talk about. And my goal is to do this very, you know, rather succinctly. I already did a video talking about metrics. I did have a student reach out to me and say, "Hey, can you talk a little bit about this? I don't really get it afterwards." And I'm looking at the fact that, and I think I know what might be causing some of the problems. We'll go over this generally, and I'll talk about specifically that issue. So when we're talking about why measure, like I said, in the good old days when HR used to talk, you know, it was just kind of a people business. You know, actually, if you go back far enough, we were just the personnel office. Okay, you came here, you got your W-2 or W-4 filled out, you got your W-2. You know, we kind of helped. You know, this is the paperwork in the organization and stuff, and so on and so forth. And we kind of ended up being sort of the dumping ground, you know, for lack of a better word, where, oh, this doesn't really fit to us, you know, personnel will take care of it, you know, type thing. Over time, personnel morphed into this human resources, and that's how we kind of got to where we are today. The way I kind of look at it is, we weren't really, you know, we were just kind of doing our thing. We weren't necessarily as to be sort of strategic in what we were doing. I would say, you know, when you started seeing in the 1980s, when Japan really started becoming very, I mean, I remember in the 80s, you know, people were just absolutely petrified that Japan was going to control the world. They were going to control America. They were buying America because they were making so much money. And one of the things, you know, people said, well, we need to understand Japanese management because, you know, we think 5 minutes in the future, they think 5 years in the future, or 50 years in the future. So that's something that, you know, kind of, you know, people would want to incorporate in their organizations. But one of the things that was really incorporated was the amount of power that the human resources organization had. In Japan, if you really wanted to be the top of the top, you had to go be a director at HR. Because HR was who made the decision of where everybody went, and so that was why it was a much more powerful organization than, say, here in the United States, where it seems to be more the CFOs and the accounting department tends to be where a lot of CEOs come from. Starting to see that trend change a little bit, but not too much here in the United States. But in Japan, you wanted to be a CEO, you were going to have to go through HR, and that was kind of the thing. But one of the things that we noticed is that Japan tended to measure a lot of things. That came from a lot of Deming's influence, because he was kind of the statistician that was responsible for a lot of the Japanese auto revolution that takes place. Well, he was, and then, you know, several others were too. A lot of Japanese who took some of his principles and then they made them better. And then, of course, that's when they start really kicking our rumps. You know, in the 70s with versus our gas guzzlers versus their small cars. Anyways, not to take this video and make it into a Japanese history lesson. But measurements really kind of became the thing in you know, in the 90s and then later on in the 2000s. And so we really have to, you know, look, I'll let you read what's on here, but in my personal opinion, the reason why we measure, we got to know how we're doing. It's a temperature test. It's a very good example. Qualitative versus quantitative measuring. Okay, some people were asking, you know, and they talk a little bit about some of it. My favorite one is temperature taking. Okay, remember the good old days when, you know, you kind of walk in and you're like, Mom, I really don't feel good. I don't want to go to school today, blah, 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 so on and so forth. And what's the first thing your mom does? Puts her hand on your forehead. Well, you don't feel warm. And then you kind of go, oh, but Mom, I feel so horrible, blah, blah, blah. And so then what does she do? She goes and gets a thermometer and then goes and takes your temperature through with the thermometer. Okay? It is entirely possible that your mother's perception of your forehead is not accurate. likelihood, I mean, let's be honest. Moms were good for everything, right? They knew everything. So you know, a mom can tell when the kid is full of it and just doesn't want to go to school. Maybe they got a test that day they don't really feel like they're ready for. But you know, sometimes you know there are sometimes you know where mom comes back and says, "Yeah, actually, you are a little warm. Okay, well, go lie down. I'll go you know make some stuff." My mother's favorite thing was always chicken soup, and you know she makes some pretty darn good chicken soup. But you know that's just kind of the thing. And so when I think of qualitative versus quantitative measurements, it's a lot of the same thing. So quantitative is always kind of let me talk about qualitative first because I think that kind of hits the thing. You know, some examples they say. You know, qualitative measures are, you know, so survey results of intent to leave. I really wish they didn't use the word survey because survey to me is still kind of quantitative, so to speak. But when you're doing a survey, it's you have to understand that the questions that they're asking, you know, a very good example, if you take a survey and it says on a scale of 1 to 7, how do you feel about blah? On a scale of 1 to 7, how do you feel about blah? Okay. And you fill that out, and we come back and we say, hey, you know, out of this survey that we took, everybody gave it an average of a 4.3. So they're okay with it, but not exactly excited. As opposed to you get all your surveys back and say it's a 6.2. Wow, they really like what we're about to do with this one thing that we're measuring. Qualitative is a little bit more when they say surveying. What they're really saying is that you know they'll say before you leave, fill out this you know please answer these questions that we have just so that we can better make ourselves better. And you'll sit there and they'll just say, hey, can you tell us in short words why you're leaving? Okay, and the person will say, I'm leaving because so and so is a complete you know what to me, doesn't treat me with respect, doesn't do everything, blah blah blah, so on and so forth. You know, I asked for, you know, a vacation time and unfortunately I never got it. This person kept working me to death, blah, 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 so on and so forth. You're not really going to get numbers out of that. It's important because it tells the other side of the story. Yeah, you know, if I'm asking people to serve, so say for example, let me tell you this example. Okay, so you're the HR manager of a large corporation. And you notice this one department has a turnover average that's roughly about 3 times that of the firm-wide average, the organization average. And you're kind of going there and you're like, wonder what's going on here. So you decide, because you're smart, you took this class, so you know to do this. You decide that you're going to go ahead and you're going to do a survey. And you say, you know, but hey, you know, before you pick up your last paycheck, please fill this out and get this back to me. And one of the questions you ask is, why are you leaving? All right. So you talk to them and they provide all of this data. You know, I'm leaving because, you know, so you get all this data and you're starting to analyze it. And the way that you analyze it is you know, I mean, in the doctoral programs, we always say that you're looking for code words, but in actuality, you're looking for trends, right? So if you're taking and you've got, you know, say for example, you've got 4 people who are leaving right after, bam, 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 and you go to them and you say, hey, fill out this survey, and every single one of them says the reason why I left is because this person doesn't respect me because I'm a woman, or I'm, you know, I've heard them say obscene things. Okay, numbers aren't going to tell you that. Qualitative research studies are going to tell you that. And if that's the case, now you have evidence that you can go back to them and say, we have a problem here. We need to go solve this. Okay. You may have times where people are saying, I'm leaving because I'm burnt out. Okay. Is that useful data? Yeah, it is. Because if you notice that that department's burnt out, it is entirely possible we're asking them to do too much. Okay. So it's very imperative that those surveys be done, and you ask them to please take it seriously. And I want to tell you guys, if you're leaving an organization, don't whine, but be factual about what's going on. Look, I asked for 3 weeks. I've asked for vacation 3 times. Every time I've been asking, my requests get denied. Um, I've asked for a pay raise twice, never got one. So and so gets pay raise every single quarter. I've never gotten one, even though I work real hard in my organization. Now, as the HR person, it is entirely possible that the person who's filling out the survey, there may be a reason why they're not getting a pay raise, is because they're not doing their job. And in that case, you just kind of go, okay, well that's fine. And if that's the only reason why they felt that they were leaving, that's good. Okay, we want high quality people here, anyways. So you can do, I tend to say that qualitative is kind of that putting your hand to your forehead and saying, yeah, you feel warm or you feel cold. Whereas quantitative is kind of sticking a thermometer in somebody's mouth or anywhere else, because in Japan they don't take temperature in the mouth; they take it under the arm, and you literally try to figure out what the temperature of the individual is as a measure. Okay, so that's really the difference between the qualitative and the quantitative measurements. Both are important; both are very valuable, and when we get to metrics for assignment 2, what we notice is that a lot of people always want to put in their assignments, just quantitative metrics, and it's not good. It's not really thinking out of the box. So learn about some they've got some really good examples here. Survey. They call it survey. I wish they wouldn't call it survey, but I guess it technically is. But where you're talking about reason to leave, value of rewards. The Navy, we used to call these command climate surveys. I don't know what the other branch of the military calls them, but command climate surveys will have qualitative and quantitative aspects. On a scale of 1 to 7, how safe do you feel you are working in this organization, and so on and so forth. Performance of new hires. I think that's kind of a broad, something that's really broad. I mean, define performance. I mean, number of days they keep coming to work on time. I would hope new hires do that. Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, but then level of confidence that the organizational values the employee. That's a very good question, and I think it's one that brings a lot of potential knowledge to the organization. Relationship. Okay, so you need to make sure that when you are taking your metrics, that you're measuring for the right things, and that you're aligning your metrics to your strategic organizational goals too. So if the strategic overall goal is to increase sales by 20%, we want to reduce our turnover by 13% or whatever it is. There's different goals that people have, but then you need to make sure that you're actually taking measurements of those items. I've seen it where and we tend to see this a lot in strategic management, where somebody will sit down and they'll actually develop all these different goals that the organization's going to have, and then nobody measures anything, or it goes and it gets shed on that shelf, goes on the shelf right over there, and then nobody ever touches it again until it gets pulled off just to dust it, and they say, oh yeah, I remember we spent hours building this but never used it, and throw it back out. So there's definitely some areas that could be improved upon if you're going to do that. Now, scorecards. I remember they used to have this thing called the balance scorecard. It was a really big topic back. I think it was in the 90s. It was more of a time. They called it the balance scorecard because back then, before then, everything was financial performance, and what they began to realize is that financial performance really isn't the end all be all. Yeah, it's nice to make money. That's always the goal of the organization. But at the same time, there's other areas of organizational performance that need to be measured too, because sometimes, and not to get too way off track, but there's, if you take a look at economic indicators, there's leading indicators and lagging indicators. A leading indicator is the stock market. So when the stock market goes up, generally the idea is that in the future, things are going to be good. Okay. You know, I say this after this past week where we had, well, you know, stock market was kind of doing this thing. Um, you know, one thing I did notice though is that I was talking to one of my buddies about it, and I said, you know, don't get out, don't get out, don't get out. And it turns out I was right. Not that I would always follow financial advice from your professional, not from, you know, just somebody that you talk to once or twice. You know, so you want to make sure that you're taking professional advice. But the you know, then there's lagging indicators, and good lagging indicator is employment. Okay, so if you know, one of the things that usually takes the longest to start to happen once economic times are good is you know that people are the employment numbers get much better, and so it tends to be it tends to be that way. Now there's different numbers that tend to work differently and all that sort of stuff. So make sure that you're focusing on what a lot of that is. I like how the section talks about a business scorecard versus an HR scorecard. You know, I'm trying to think the balance scorecard was probably the most popular. I'm trying to think. Yeah, they did talk. Pascon. Yeah, so they talked about Kaplan and Norton was really a big sighting of that. I'm gonna probably okay. So evaluating total rewards. This is a very good thing. There's actually master's degrees that talk about how to do this. It's not just total rewards, but it's also about any other type of change in your organization that you do. And there's actually, if you want to Google it, look for the HPT, the Human Performance Technology Model. It is a great model when talking about you know, how organizational change is basically done, and and how to implement that organizational change. It's not really an analysis. I mean, there's an analysis component to it. There's better analyses that are out there, but I think that one of the things that you can take a look at is that sort of that entire total package. And it's a very good one. I tend to be a big fan of it, and and so when we're talking about organizational change, that's something that you usually want to sort of bring in. So that brings us to the end. If you have any questions, this went way long. I apologize. I kind of rambled a little bit. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer them. And again, I'm sorry that this took so late this week, but these videos should be up very quickly, and then hopefully you'll be able to catch up to them. Remember, assignment 2 is due soon. Please reach out to me if you have any questions about that. I finally got moved into my final office, so once I have that, I will update that and send you guys my new office phone number so you can contact me at any time. And thank you very much, and looking forward to seeing you guys over the week.